The words came out as barely a whisper, but in the hushed cathedral filled with Philadelphia's elite, Marcus Chen's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Isabella, your father isn't dead." 600 guests turned in their seats. The bride froze at the altar, her $50,000 Vera Wang gown suddenly feeling like chains around her chest. Her fiancé, tech mogul David Sterling, reached for her hand, but she pulled back, her emerald eyes locked on the janitor standing in the center aisle. Marcus shouldn't have been there. He should have been emptying trash cans in the basement of Sterling Tech Tower, invisible as always, earning his $12 an hour while the world above him celebrated wealth he'd never touch. Instead, he stood among silk ties and diamond necklaces, his gray uniform a stark contrast to the sea of designer formal wear, holding a crumpled photograph that would shatter everything Isabella Ashford thought she knew about her life. The cathedral fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the soft whisper of fabric as Isabella lifted the hem of her gown and took one step toward him, then another. "What did you say?" Her voice trembled, barely audible over the collective intake of breath from 600 witnesses. Marcus's hands shook as he held up the photograph, a hospital ID badge worn and faded, showing a man with Isabella's eyes and her stubborn chin. "Your father, Dr. James Ashford. He's alive, Isabella, and he's been asking for you every day for the past 15 years. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you." The photograph fluttered to the marble floor as Isabella's world tilted on its axis. Behind her, David Sterling's voice rose sharp and commanding. "Security, remove this man immediately." But Isabella held up her hand, stopping the advancing guards in their tracks. Her eyes never left Marcus's face, this man she'd passed in hallways for 3 years without ever really seeing, who now stood before her with information that could destroy the foundation of everything she believed. "How do you know this?" she whispered. Marcus swallowed hard, aware that every word he spoke was being recorded by dozens of phones, that tomorrow the headlines would either vindicate him or destroy him completely. "Because I've been visiting him every week for 2 years, at Mercy General's long-term care facility. He has early onset dementia, but on his good days, he remembers you. He remembers everything." The cathedral erupted. Guests surged to their feet, voices rising in shocked murmurs. Cameras flashed. Someone screamed. But in the eye of the storm, Isabella Ashford, heiress to a billion-dollar empire, about to marry one of the most powerful men in the country, stared at a janitor who had just turned her world upside down with 6 impossible words. "My father died when I was 12, she said. But even as the words left her lips, doubt crept into her voice. "My stepfather told me. My mother told me. The death certificate was a lie," Marcus finished quietly. "All of it. Your stepfather had him declared mentally incompetent and committed. Your father has been trying to reach you for 15 years. David Sterling's face had gone white with rage. "This is insane. Isabella, don't listen to this. This lunatic, he's clearly mentally unstable." Guards. But Isabella was already moving, her heels clicking against the marble as she walked down the aisle toward Marcus. With each step, her 27 years of carefully constructed reality began to crumble. The trust funds, the inheritance, the merger that this marriage would seal. All of it built on a lie. Marcus reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a second item, a letter, the envelope worn soft from handling. "He wrote this for you, last month on one of his clear days. He told me if anything happened to him, I had to find you. I had to tell you the truth." Isabella's fingers trembled as she took the letter. Her name was written across the front in handwriting she recognized from birthday cards that had stopped coming when she turned 12. Handwriting she'd been told would never grace a page again, because the man who wrote it was dead. She looked up at Marcus, this stranger who had somehow become the most important person in her life in the span of 30 seconds. "Why didn't you tell me before? Why wait until this?" Marcus's voice broke. "I tried. I sent letters to your office. I called your assistant. I even tried to approach you in the elevator once, but your security stopped me. No one listens to the janitor, Isabella. No one sees us unless something's broken." In the front pew, Isabella's mother, Catherine Ashford Sterling, sat frozen, her face a mask of perfect composure that didn't quite hide the terror in her eyes. Beside her, Isabella's stepfather, David's own father, Robert Sterling, whispered urgently into his phone. Isabella's world narrowed to the letter in her hands and the man standing before her. Everything else, the cathedral, the guests, the cameras, even David's increasingly frantic voice behind her, faded into background noise. "What's his room number?" she asked quietly. 307. "But Isabella, he doesn't have long. The doctors say maybe a few weeks, maybe less. The dementia is progressing faster now." Isabella closed her eyes, the letter pressed against her chest. When she opened them again, they blazed with a determination that Marcus had only seen once before, 3 years ago when she'd fired an executive for sexually harassing his secretary. It was the look of a woman who had made a choice that nothing could change. She turned to face the altar where David stood red-faced and furious, his carefully planned merger marriage crumbling before his eyes. "David, I'm sorry." "Isabella, don't be ridiculous. This man is clearly delusional. Your father is dead. You know this. We've planned this wedding for 2 years. "My father," Isabella said, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral, "is apparently alive, and I'm going to see him." She reached behind her neck and unclasped the diamond necklace, David's grandmother's necklace worth more than most people's houses. She placed it gently on the altar beside her bouquet of white roses that had cost more than Marcus made in a month. "Isabella," David's voice cracked with desperation, "think about what you're doing, the merger, the company, our future." She turned back to him, and for the first time in their 3-year relationship, she looked at David Sterling and saw him clearly, the ambition that masqueraded as love, the possession that he called devotion, the way he looked at her like an acquisition to be managed rather than a woman to be cherished. "Our future was built on a lie," she said simply. Marcus watched in stunned silence as Isabella Ashford, the woman who had never spoken more than 5 words to him, who lived in a world so far above his that they might as well have been different species, turned her back on a billion-dollar merger and walked toward him. The cathedral had descended into chaos. Guests were on their feet, some shouting, others frantically making phone calls. The wedding photographer continued shooting, capturing the most expensive wedding that would never be. Security guards stood frozen, unsure whether to arrest the janitor who had destroyed their boss's wedding or protect the bride who was walking away from everything. Isabella stopped in front of Marcus, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that reminded him of the garden his mother had tended before she died. Up close, he could see that her makeup was beginning to smudge, that tears had started to form in her eyes. "Take me to him," she said simply. "Please." Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He had come here expecting to be arrested, expecting to be dismissed as a crazy person, expecting Isabella to choose the safe path of denying everything. He had never imagined this. As they walked toward the cathedral doors together, the billionaire heiress in her wedding gown and the janitor in his gray uniform, Marcus caught sight of Catherine Sterling in the front pew, the woman who had raised Isabella, who had lied to her for 15 years, sat perfectly still, her face a mask of controlled terror. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Marcus saw the truth there. Catherine had always known. She had always known, and she had chosen her new husband's wealth over her daughter's right to know her father was alive. The heavy cathedral doors swung open, and Philadelphia sunlight streamed in, temporarily blinding them both. Outside, the street was lined with luxury cars and hired drivers who had expected to ferry guests to an elegant reception. Instead, they would witness the bride running away with the janitor. Isabella paused on the cathedral steps, the full weight of what she was doing hitting her. Behind them, she could hear David shouting her name, could hear her mother's voice raised in panic, could hear the chaos of 600 guests, realizing they had just witnessed one of the most expensive wedding disasters in Philadelphia history. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked quietly. "Once we walk down these steps, there's no going back. Your life, your family, everything changes." Isabella looked down at the letter still clutched in her hand, then back at Marcus, this man who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by telling her the truth. This man who had seen her father every week, who had held his hand and listened to his stories, who had become a bridge between a daughter and a father when no one else would. "My life already changed," she said, "the moment you told me the truth." They descended the steps together, leaving behind the cathedral, the wedding, and the carefully constructed lie that had shaped Isabella's entire adult life. Behind them, the chaos continued, but ahead of them lay something neither had expected when the day began: hope. Marcus's ancient Honda Civic looked ridiculous next to the line of Mercedes and BMWs, but Isabella didn't hesitate as he opened the passenger door for her. She gathered her massive skirt and somehow managed to fit into the small car, her veil trailing out the window like a flag of surrender. As they pulled away from the cathedral, Marcus caught sight of David Sterling in his rearview mirror, standing on the steps in his $1,000 tuxedo, looking lost and furious and smaller than Marcus had ever seen him. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked as they stopped at the first red light. Isabella let out a laugh that was half hysteria, half relief. "I just ran away from my own wedding with a man whose last name I don't even know." "Chen," Marcus said quietly. "Marcus Chen." "Marcus Chen," she repeated, as if testing the words. "Well, Marcus Chen, I hope you're right about my father, because if you're wrong, I just threw away my entire life for nothing." Marcus looked at her, this woman who had given up everything on the word of a janitor, who was sitting in his beat-up car in a wedding dress that cost more than he made in a year, who was about to discover that everything she thought she knew about her family was a lie. "I'm not wrong," he said quietly. "And for what it's worth, I don't think you threw away your life. I think you just found it." The light turned green, and they drove toward Mercy General Hospital, toward a reunion 15 years in the making, toward a truth that would reshape everything Isabella thought she knew about love, family, and the difference between wealth and worth. Behind them, the cathedral bells that should have been ringing in celebration fell silent, and the city continued its relentless pulse, unaware that one act of courage from an invisible man had just rewritten the story of one of its most powerful families. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General Hospital cast everything in harsh, clinical white as Isabella's heels echoed down the long corridor. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of silk and lace that had taken 6 months to create, now felt like a costume from someone else's life. Nurses and orderlies stopped to stare as she passed, not because they recognized the billionaire heiress, but because seeing a bride in a hospital was either the beginning of a beautiful story or the end of a tragic one. Marcus walked beside her, his janitor's uniform drawing curious glances from staff who wondered why he was escorting a woman in a wedding gown through their halls. He had called ahead during the drive, speaking quietly to the head nurse, explaining that Isabella was coming. that after 15 years, Dr. James Ashford's daughter was finally going to see him. "Room 307 is just around this corner," Marcus said softly, slowing his pace. "But Isabella, I need to prepare you. He's not the man you remember, the dementia. Some days he's completely lucid, sharp as ever. Other days he thinks he's still practicing medicine in 1995. And sometimes—" Marcus's voice caught. "Sometimes he doesn't remember anything at all." Isabella stopped walking. The letter from her father was still clutched in her hand, now wrinkled and damp from her nervous grip. "Does he know I'm coming?" "I told him yesterday that I was going to try one more time to reach you." He smiled, really smiled. For the first time in weeks, he said, "She'll come. My Isabella always was stubborn as a mule. She'll come when she's ready." Isabella's breath hitched. It was something her father used to say when she was little, when she would dig in her heels about bedtime or vegetables or any of the small battles between father and daughter. The phrase was so distinctly his that hearing it now, after 15 years of believing he was dead, hit her like a physical blow. "He remembers me? You're all he talks about on his good days. Your first steps, your first day of school, the time you tried to give him a haircut when you were 6 and nearly made him bald." Marcus smiled sadly. "He carries a picture of you, the last school photo he had before everything happened. You're wearing that blue dress with the white collar." Isabella's free hand flew to her throat. She remembered that dress, remembered how proud she'd been of that school photo, because she'd finally learned to smile without showing the gap where she'd lost her front tooth. It had been the last picture taken before her world fell apart, before her father's mysterious death had left her with only her mother and a stepfather who never quite looked at her with warmth. They rounded the corner and Isabella saw the door, room 307. A simple placard beside it read, "James Ashford, M.D., not patient or resident, but doctor. Even here, even diminished by disease, the staff respected who he had been." "I volunteer here 3 evenings a week," Marcus explained quietly. "After my shift at Sterling Tech ends, I help with the patients who don't get many visitors. Your father, he was alone for so long. 2 years ago, I was reading to Mrs. Patterson in 309, and I heard him crying. Not the confused crying that sometimes comes with the disease, but the deep, heartbroken sobbing of a man who had lost everything." Isabella turned to look at Marcus fully, for the first time since they'd left the cathedral. Really look at him. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful posture of someone who had learned to make himself small, unnoticed. His uniform was clean but worn, mended in places with patches that were nearly invisible unless you looked closely. "You stopped to check on a stranger?" "I stopped because nobody should cry alone." Marcus's voice was simple, matter-of-fact. "I introduced myself, and he thought I was a doctor at first. Started talking about his daughter, how proud he was of her, how she was going to change the world. It took weeks before I realized he was talking about you." Isabella Ashford, the CEO of Blackwater Industries. Isabella felt tears start to form. "What did you do when you realized?" "I went home and looked you up. Found out you worked in the same building I cleaned every night. Found out you thought your father was dead." Marcus leaned against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "I tried for months to figure out how to tell you. How does a janitor approach a CEO with news like that? How do you convince someone that everything they believe about their family is a lie?" The weight of what Marcus had carried, what he had sacrificed to be here, hit Isabella like a wave. This man had risked his job, his reputation, his freedom to tell her the truth. He had disrupted his own life to reunite a daughter with her father, asking for nothing in return. "Marcus," she said quietly, "why? Why did you care enough to do this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on something distant. "My father died when I was 16. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. He was working late trying to finish a project for his boss, and he just collapsed. Alone in an empty office building." His voice grew softer. "I found out later that he'd been having chest pains for weeks, but he couldn't afford to take time off work to see a doctor, couldn't afford to seem weak." Isabella's throat tightened. "When I met your father, when I saw how alone he was, how desperate he was to see you." Marcus shrugged. "I guess I thought about all the conversations I never got to have with my dad, all the things left unsaid. If there was a chance to give someone else that opportunity, I had to try." Isabella reached out and touched his arm gently. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry, just—" He gestured toward room 307. "Don't let fear stop you, whatever's behind. That door, whatever he's become, he's still your father, and he's been waiting 15 years to see you." Isabella nodded, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. The room was small but clean, filled with afternoon sunlight from a large window that looked out over the city. Medical equipment hummed quietly in the corner, but the space felt more like a bedroom than a hospital room. There were flowers on the windowsill, fresh daisies that Marcus brought every week. Books lined a small shelf, and the walls were covered with photographs. Isabella's breath caught. Every photograph was of her. School pictures, newspaper clippings from business magazines, even printouts from her company's website. Her entire life, from age 12 to present day, documented on the walls of this small room. In the center of it all was the picture Marcus had mentioned, Isabella at 11, gap-toothed and grinning in her blue dress. And there, in the bed by the window, was her father. James Ashford was thinner than she remembered, his hair completely gray now, his face lined with age and illness. But his eyes were the same warm brown she remembered, and when he saw her standing in the doorway in her wedding dress, those eyes filled with tears. "Bella," he whispered, using the nickname only he had ever called her. "My beautiful Bella, you came." Isabella's composure shattered. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps and fell to her knees beside his bed, taking his hand in hers. It was warm and familiar, the same hand that had taught her to tie her shoes, and helped her with homework, and held her when nightmares made sleep impossible. "Daddy?" The word came out broken, uncertain, like she was 12 years old again. "Oh, my darling girl." James struggled to sit up, and Isabella helped him, careful of the IV lines and monitors. "Look at you, so beautiful, so grown up. And in a wedding dress? Did I miss your wedding?" Marcus stepped forward gently. "Dr. Ashford, Isabella came to see you instead of getting married today." James's eyes widened, and he looked from Marcus to Isabella with growing concern. "Instead of? Bella, sweetheart, what does that mean?" Isabella laughed through her tears. "It means that Marcus told me something today that changed everything. He told me you were alive." The confusion in James's eyes cleared, replaced by a pain so deep that Isabella felt it in her own chest. "You thought I was dead?" "For 15 years. Mom and Robert said you died when I was 12. Heart attack. They had a funeral and everything. I visited your grave every year on your birthday." James closed his eyes, his whole body sagging against the pillows. "Catherine told you I was dead?" "She said you had a heart attack at work, that you died instantly. Robert showed me the death certificate." A forged death certificate. James's voice was bitter now, angry in a way that Marcus had never heard before. "Robert Sterling had me declared mentally incompetent when the early signs of dementia started showing. Had me committed, told Catherine it was temporary, just until we could figure out treatment. But instead of treatment, he had lawyers draw up papers giving him power of attorney. had me declared legally dead while I was locked in a psychiatric facility. Isabella felt sick. But why? Why would they do that? Money, sweetheart. It always comes back to money. James gripped her hand tighter. When I was diagnosed with early-onset dementia at 52, your stepfather realized that all of our shared investments, our joint holdings, everything we'd built together would eventually fall to you as my heir. But if I was declared incompetent and then dead, Catherine would inherit everything as my widow. She could then merge her holdings with Robert's when they married. The pieces clicked into place in Isabella's mind with horrible clarity. Her mother's quick remarriage to Robert Sterling just 6 months after her father's supposed death. The merger of Ashford Industries with Sterling Holdings that had made their family even wealthier. The trust fund that would become Isabella's when she married David, Robert's son, keeping the money firmly in Sterling family control. The wedding today, Isabella said slowly. Marrying David, that was all part of the plan, wasn't it? To keep the money in the family? James nodded sadly. I'm afraid so, my darling. You were never meant to find out the truth. In a few more years, when the dementia progresses, I would have died naturally, and no one would have been able to prove what really happened. Isabella stood up abruptly, pacing to the window, her mind racing. 15 years I grieved for you. I became a different person because I thought you were dead. I made business decisions, life decisions, thinking about what you would have wanted, trying to honor your memory, and all this time you were here, alone. Not completely alone, Marcus said quietly. He talks about you constantly. On his good days, he's so proud of what you've accomplished. He followed every business article, every interview. He knows about the pediatric hospital wing you funded, the scholarship program you started. He knows you became exactly the person he hoped you'd become. Isabella turned back to her father. You know about all that? James smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the father she remembered. I know you turned Ashford Industries into the most ethical company in Philadelphia. I know you refuse government contracts that compromise your values. I know you pay your entry-level workers a living wage, and that you personally interview every employee who's been with the company more than 5 years. His voice grew proud. I know you're everything I dreamed you could be, and more. Isabella sat back down on the edge of the bed. But I almost married David. I almost let them complete their plan. But you didn't, James said gently. You listened to your heart. You listened to Marcus. You chose truth over convenience, just like I taught you when you were little. Isabella looked over at Marcus, who had been standing quietly by the door, giving them space for their reunion. Marcus, how did you figure it all out? How did you know what really happened? Marcus stepped forward. Your father had been keeping journals, even with the dementia. On his clear days, he would write down everything he remembered, everything that had happened. Last month, he gave me a box of them and asked me to make sure they got to you if something happened to him. When I read them, the whole story was there. The forced commitment, the forged documents, the conspiracy between your mother and stepfather. Do you have them? The journals? Marcus nodded and pulled a worn shoebox from under James's bed. He kept them hidden, afraid the staff might throw them away if they found them, but he made me promise to give them to you. Isabella opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of small notebooks, their pages filled with her father's handwriting. Some entries were clear and precise, others rambling and confused, but all of them were addressed to her. She opened the top journal randomly and read aloud. Day 1-2-47. Bella would be 27 today. I wonder if she still makes that face when she's thinking hard, the one where she bites her bottom lip. I hope she found someone who makes her laugh the way she used to laugh when we would have our Saturday pancake breakfasts. I hope she knows how proud I am. Isabella's voice broke on the last words. She looked up at her father through tears. I still make that face, and I never stopped missing Saturday pancakes. James reached up and touched her cheek gently. We can have pancakes again if you'd like. The cafeteria here is terrible, but Marcus sometimes brings me real food. Every Saturday, Isabella said firmly. I'm going to come every Saturday, and we're going to have pancakes and catch up on 15 years. But what about your life, your company, well, I suppose David Sterling is no longer part of the picture? Isabella laughed, surprising herself. No, definitely not, and the company will be fine. I have excellent people working for me. Besides, she looked over at Marcus again. I think I owe someone a very large thank you, and probably a job that doesn't involve emptying my trash cans. Marcus shook his head quickly. Isabella, I didn't do this for a reward. I don't want anything from you. What if I want to give you something anyway? Isabella stood up, brushing wrinkles from her wedding dress. What if I told you that Ashford Industries could use someone with your integrity, someone who isn't afraid to tell the truth even when it's difficult? I don't have any qualifications for that kind of work. You have the most important qualification. You care about people more than money. Isabella moved closer to him. Marcus, you risked everything to reunite a daughter with her father. You spent 2 years sitting with a lonely old man just because you thought no one should cry alone. You turned my world upside down because it was the right thing to do, not because you wanted something from me. James spoke up from the bed. She's right, son. I've seen a lot of people in my 70 years, and character like yours is rare. Don't underestimate its value. Marcus looked between Isabella and her father, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Isabella said simply. Say yes to helping me rebuild my relationship with my father. Say yes to helping me figure out how to handle the fact that my entire family has been lying to me for 15 years. Say yes to being part of something good instead of just cleaning up after it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, but I have one condition. Name it. I want to keep volunteering here. These people, they need someone to see them, to sit with them. I won't give that up for any job. Isabella smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from her since they'd left the cathedral. I wouldn't ask you to. In fact, maybe Ashford Industries could sponsor a volunteer program here. Make sure every patient has someone to sit with them. That, James said from the bed, sounds exactly like something my daughter would think of. A soft knock at the door interrupted them, and a nurse peered in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but visiting hours end in 30 minutes. Isabella looked at the clock on the wall, surprised to find that they'd been talking for over 2 hours. Time had seemed suspended in this small room, as if the outside world had paused to let them catch up on 15 lost years. I'll be back tomorrow, Isabella promised her father, and every day after that until, well, for as long as we have. James gripped her hand. Bella, I need you to know something. Whatever happens with your mother and Robert, whatever legal battles come from this, I want you to be careful. They have a lot to lose if the truth comes out. A lot of money, a lot of reputation. People have done terrible things for much less. Isabella's expression hardened. Let me worry about Catherine and Robert. Right now, I just want to focus on you, on us, on making up for lost time. And Marcus, James added, looking at the younger man with genuine affection. Thank you for giving me back my daughter. Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. As they prepared to leave, Isabella turned back to her father one more time. Dad, do you remember what you used to tell me when I was scared about something new? James smiled, his eyes brightening with memory. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Bella. It's doing the right thing even when you're afraid. I'm scared now, Isabella admitted, about what comes next, about facing Mom and Robert, about rebuilding our relationship, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's my girl, James said proudly. That's my brave, stubborn, wonderful daughter. As they walked back down the hospital corridor, Isabella's wedding dress trailing behind her like a symbol of her old life, Marcus broke the comfortable silence between them. What happens now? Isabella considered the question as they reached the elevator. Now I go home and have a very difficult conversation with my mother and stepfather. Now I call my lawyer and figure out what legal options we have. Now I start living my life based on truth instead of lies. The elevator doors opened, and as they stepped inside, Isabella caught her reflection in the polished steel. She looked different somehow, not just because of the smudged makeup or the wrinkled dress, but something deeper, something in her eyes that hadn't been there that morning. Marcus? Yeah? Thank you, not just for telling me about my father, but for seeing me. Really seeing me. For the past 3 years, I've walked past you in the hallways of my own building, and I never really looked at you. I never saw how much kindness was right there, cleaning up after my careless world. Marcus met her eyes in the reflection. You see me now. I do, and I promise from now on, I'm going to see everyone, really see them. The elevator reached the ground floor, and as the doors opened, they were greeted by the chaos of the outside world. Isabella's phone, which had been on silent during the visit, immediately began buzzing with dozens of missed calls and text messages. The wedding that never was had created a media frenzy, and everyone wanted answers. But for the first time in her adult life, Isabella Ashford wasn't thinking about public relations or damage control or what the board of directors would say. She was thinking about Saturday morning pancakes with her father, about the journals full of 15 years of love and longing, about the man walking beside her who had shown her that sometimes the most important voices are the ones we never think to listen to. Marcus, she said as they reached his car, are you ready for this to get very complicated very quickly? Marcus opened the passenger door for her, this woman who had walked away from a billion-dollar merger to sit beside her father's hospital bed. Isabella, my life got complicated the moment I decided to tell you the truth, but complicated doesn't mean wrong. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. As they drove away from Mercy General Hospital, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the city, Isabella began to plan. Not for a wedding that would never happen, not for a merger that would never be signed, but for justice, for truth, for the kind of complicated, messy, real love that her father had been waiting 15 years to share with her. Behind them in room 307, James Ashford sat by his window watching his daughter's car disappear into traffic and smiled wider than he had in 15 years. His Bella was coming home. The Sterling mansion sat on 5 pristine acres in Chestnut Hill, its Georgian columns gleaming white against the manicured lawns. Isabella had grown up in this house after her father's supposed death, but as Marcus drove through the iron gates, she realized she had never truly felt at home here. It had always felt like a museum, beautiful, cold, and designed more for display than for living. You don't have to come in with me, Isabella said as Marcus parked behind a line of expensive cars. Apparently, the wedding guests had regrouped here for damage control. Actually, I think I do. Marcus turned off the engine and looked at the imposing facade. They're going to try to discredit everything I told you. They're going to paint me as a delusional janitor who manipulated you during an emotional moment. If I'm not there to defend the truth, Isabella reached over and squeezed his hand. Marcus, these people, my family, they can be vicious when cornered, They have lawyers, money, influence. They could destroy your life just to protect their secret. They already tried to destroy your father's life, Marcus replied quietly, and they succeeded for 15 years. I won't let them do it again. As they approached the front door, Isabella could hear voices from inside, her mother's clipped tones, Robert Sterling's booming authority, and underneath it all, David's angry protests. She had faced down hostile corporate boards and aggressive media, but she had never felt her hands shake the way they were shaking now. The door opened before they could knock. Catherine Sterling stood in the doorway, still wearing the powder blue mother-of-the-bride dress she'd chosen for the wedding. Her makeup was perfect, her posture rigid, but Isabella could see the fear in her eyes. "Isabella, darling," Catherine said, her voice carefully controlled. "Thank goodness you're safe. When you ran off with this person, we were terrified something had happened to you." "Something did happen to me," Isabella replied, stepping into the marble foyer with Marcus beside her. "I found out my father is alive." Catherine's composure cracked for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Sweetheart, I know you're upset about the wedding, but this fantasy about your father, it's not a fantasy." Isabella pulled out her father's letter, now worn from handling. "He wrote this last month. I've seen him, Mom. I've held his hand. I've looked into his eyes. James Ashford is alive, and you've known it for 15 years. The voices from the living room had stopped. Isabella could feel the presence of others listening, waiting to see how this confrontation would unfold. Robert Sterling emerged from the living room, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, but with his bow tie undone, hanging loose around his neck like a noose. Behind him came David, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "Isabella," Robert's voice was measured, paternal. "I understand you're upset. Wedding days are emotional, and when strangers take advantage of that emotion—" "Strangers," Isabella stepped forward, her voice rising. "Marcus has been taking care of my father for 2 years, visiting him every week, reading to him, holding his hand when he cried for his daughter, while you collected the profits from his supposed death." Robert's eyes flicked to Marcus with undisguised contempt. "This man is a janitor, Isabella, a minimum wage worker with obvious mental health issues. He's clearly developed some sort of obsession with you, constructed this elaborate fantasy." "Stop!" Isabella's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Stop talking about Marcus like he's not standing right here. Stop dismissing him because of his job or his paycheck, and stop lying to me." David moved closer, his voice pleading. "Bella, baby, listen to yourself. You're talking about throwing away everything we've built together because some janitor filled your head with conspiracy theories. This is insane." Isabella turned to face her ex-fiancé fully. "Don't call me baby. You lost that right when I realized you've been lying to me our entire relationship. Tell me, David, when did you find out? When did you learn that marrying me was just the final step in your father's plan to steal my inheritance?" David's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The merger, David. The convenient timing of our engagement, right when I turned 27 and gained access to my full trust fund. The way you always steered conversations away from my father, always had some distraction ready whenever I got sad thinking about him." Isabella's voice broke slightly. "Did you ever love me, or was I just a business acquisition?" "Of course I loved you." "Love you," David stammered. "This is all just—" "A lie," Isabella finished. "Everything between us was built on a lie." Catherine stepped forward, her voice taking on the soothing tone she'd used when Isabella was a child having nightmares. "Darling, even if your father were alive, which I'm telling you he's not, what would be the point of dwelling on it now? You have a life here, a future with David, a company to run. What would be the point?" Isabella stared at her mother in disbelief. The point would be that I've spent 15 years grieving for a man who was locked away in a hospital, wondering if his daughter would ever come to see him. The point would be that every major decision I've made as an adult has been influenced by wanting to honor a dead father who wasn't actually dead. Marcus stepped forward slightly. Mrs. Sterling, I have Dr. Ashford's medical records, his journals, documentation of the forced commitment and the forged death certificate. The truth is going to come out eventually. Wouldn't it be better to tell Isabella the real story now? Robert's mask of paternal concern slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. You have nothing but the ravings of a man with dementia and your own desperate need for attention. No court would accept those as evidence. Maybe not, Marcus agreed calmly, but the media would love the story. Billionaire family fakes death to steal fortune. It has everything: money, betrayal, a daughter's 15-year search for truth. I bet it would make quite a few front pages. Are you threatening us? Robert's voice was dangerous now. I'm stating facts, Marcus replied, the same way I stated the fact that Dr. Ashford was alive when I interrupted your son's wedding. David lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the shirt. You destroyed my wedding, you psycho! You ruined everything! Marcus didn't fight back, didn't even try to break David's grip. He just looked at the angry young man with something like pity. I didn't destroy anything, David. I just told the truth. If that destroyed your wedding, maybe the wedding was built on the wrong foundation. Isabella stepped between them, pushing David away from Marcus. Don't touch him. Him? David's voice cracked with disbelief. You're choosing him over me? A janitor over everything we had planned? A good man over a lie, Isabella corrected. And yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. Catherine moved to her daughter's side, her voice becoming urgent. Isabella, think about what you're saying. Think about what you're throwing away. Your reputation, your social standing, the respect of everyone who matters in this city. Everyone who matters. Isabella looked around the opulent foyer at these people she had called family for 15 years. You want to know who matters, Mom? My father matters. The man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework and told me bedtime stories. The man who's been sitting in a hospital room for 15 years, hoping his daughter would find him. He matters. She turned to Marcus, and Marcus matters. A man who sees injustice and risks everything to fight it. A man who sits with lonely people because he believes no one should suffer alone. A man who told me the hardest truth I've ever had to hear because it was the right thing to do. He matters. Isabella faced her family again, her voice growing stronger. You want to know who doesn't matter? People who value money over truth. People who would steal from their own family and call it love. People who would let a father die alone rather than risk their precious social standing. Robert's facade finally crumbled completely. You ungrateful little bitch. We gave you everything. We raised you, educated you, made you into someone who mattered in this world. And this is how you repay us? By believing some nobody over your own family? The words hung in the air like poison. Isabella had never heard Robert speak to her that way, had never seen the mask slip so completely. But instead of feeling hurt, she felt liberated. This was who he really was, who he had always been beneath the false paternal warmth. Thank you, she said quietly. Robert blinked. What? Thank you for finally showing me who you really are. For 15 years, I thought I wasn't good enough for your approval. I thought I needed to try harder to be the daughter you wanted. But you never wanted a daughter, did you, Robert? You wanted a business asset. Catherine reached for Isabella's arm. Sweetheart, he's just upset. Isabella pulled away. Stop, Mom, just stop. I know you're involved in this. I know you chose money over truth, chose Robert over my father. The question is, Are you going to keep lying, or are you going to tell me what really happened? For a moment, Catherine's perfect composure wavered. Isabella saw something in her mother's eyes that might have been regret, might have been love, might have been the ghost of the woman she had been before money and status became more important than integrity. But then the moment passed, and Catherine's walls went back up. I don't know what you want me to say, Isabella. Your father died 15 years ago. I have the death certificate. You have a forged document, Marcus said quietly. I've seen the real medical records. Robert turned on him viciously. No one asked you to speak, you piece of trash. You're nothing. You're nobody. And when we're done with you, you'll have nothing left. Actually, Isabella said, her voice cutting through Robert's threats, Marcus works for me now. As of today, he's the new Director of Ethics and Employee Relations at Ashford Industries, which means he has the full legal protection of my company, and any threats against him will be treated as threats against Ashford Industries itself. The room fell silent. David stared at her in shock. Catherine's face went white. Robert's hands clenched into fists. You're making a mistake, Robert said slowly, a very expensive mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting you for 15 years. Isabella moved toward the door, Marcus beside her. But that ends now, David called after her desperately. Isabella, please, we can work this out. We can postpone the wedding, go to counseling, figure this all out together. Isabella paused at the door and turned back to him. David, answer me honestly. Did you know about my father, about the plan to keep him from me? David's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His silence was answer enough. I thought so. Isabella's voice was sad now, not angry. For what it's worth, I did love you, or I loved who I thought you were. But that person never really existed, did he? As they reached Marcus's car, Isabella could hear shouting from inside the house. Robert's voice rising in anger, David's pleading, Catherine's sharp attempts to restore order. The family she had known was fracturing, but instead of grief, Isabella felt something unexpected. Relief. Are you okay? Marcus asked as they got into the car. Isabella considered the question as they drove away from the Sterling mansion. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 15 years, and I can finally exhale. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. They drove in comfortable silence through the darkening city, past the cathedral where Isabella should have been cutting her wedding cake, past the restaurant where her reception should have been in full swing. Instead, she was sitting in a janitor's car, wearing a wrinkled wedding dress, heading back to see the father she had mourned for half her life. Marcus, Isabella said as they pulled into the hospital parking lot. What happens now? I mean, really? Robert and Catherine aren't going to just accept this. They're going to fight. They have lawyers, private investigators, media connections. They're going to try to destroy both of us. Marcus turned off the engine and looked at her. Are you afraid? Terrified, Isabella admitted, but also excited. Is that weird? For the first time in my adult life, I'm making choices based on what's right instead of what's expected. It's scary, but it's also the most alive I've felt in years. Then we'll face whatever comes together, Marcus said simply. You, me, and your father. The truth has a way of winning eventually, even when it takes 15 years. They walked back into the hospital hand in hand, past staring nurses and curious visitors, back to room 307, where James Ashford was waiting. When they entered, he was sitting up in bed, more alert than Isabella had seen him earlier. Bella, he said, his eyes immediately going to their joined hands. How did it go? Isabella sat down beside his bed, not letting go of Marcus's hand. It went exactly like you'd expect. They denied everything, threatened Marcus, and made it clear they're not going to accept the truth quietly. James nodded sadly. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I had hoped... Well, I had hoped Catherine might still have some of the woman I fell in love with left in her, but I suppose money changes people. It doesn't have to, Isabella said firmly. Marcus has shown me that there are still people who choose what's right over what's profitable. James looked at Marcus with deep gratitude. You've given me back my daughter, son. How do I ever repay that? You don't, Marcus replied. You just love her the way you've been loving her for 15 years. That's enough. Isabella felt tears start again, but this time they were tears of joy, not grief. Dad, I want to ask you something. Tomorrow I'm going to call a press conference. I'm going to tell the world what really happened, expose the lies, let everyone know that James Ashford is alive. Are you ready for that? For the media attention, the questions, the chaos? James smiled, and Isabella saw a flash of the strong, confident man he had been before the disease began stealing pieces of him. Bella, I've been dead to the world for 15 years. If a little chaos is the price of getting my life back, of seeing my daughter again, then bring on the chaos. Isabella squeezed Marcus's hand tighter. Then that's what we'll do. We'll tell the truth, deal with the consequences, and figure out the rest as we go. Together, Marcus added. Together, James agreed. As the three of them sat in that small hospital room, planning their assault on 15 years of lies, Isabella realized something profound had shifted inside her. The woman who had woken up that morning preparing to marry for merger instead of love was gone. In her place was someone Isabella barely recognized but deeply respected, a woman willing to sacrifice everything for truth, for family, for the kind of love that couldn't be bought or sold. Outside, Philadelphia glittered in the darkness, unaware that in room 307 of Mercy General Hospital, 3 people were preparing to shake the foundations of one of the city's most powerful families. The storm was coming, and Isabella Ashford, daughter, CEO, and newfound believer in the power of truth, was ready for it. The next morning, Isabella stood before a bank of microphones in the lobby of Blackwater Industries headquarters, flanked by her lawyers and with Marcus beside her. Behind them, a large photograph of James Ashford smiled down at the assembled reporters. Ladies and gentlemen, Isabella began, her voice clear and strong. My name is Isabella Ashford, and 15 years ago I was told my father died of a heart attack. Today I'm here to tell you that was a lie. My father, Dr. James Ashford, is alive. He has been a patient at Mercy General Hospital for 15 years, placed there against his will and declared legally dead to steal his fortune. The room erupted in questions, cameras flashing, reporters shouting over each other, but Isabella stood steady, Marcus's presence beside her giving her strength. I will be providing documentation to support these claims, she continued. Medical records, forged documents, and testimony from witnesses who can verify every detail of this conspiracy. The people responsible for this crime will face justice no matter how powerful they think they are. A reporter called out, Miss Ashford, are you saying your own mother was involved in this conspiracy? Isabella's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. I'm saying that the truth will come out. All of it. What about your relationship with David Sterling? Are you saying the wedding was called off because of these allegations? Isabella looked directly into the camera. I called off my wedding because I refused to build my life on lies, because I've learned that integrity matters more than inheritance, that truth matters more than tradition, and that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. She glanced at Marcus, then back at the cameras. I've also learned that sometimes the most important voices are the ones we never think to listen to. Sometimes a janitor has more wisdom than a CEO, more courage than a billionaire, more integrity than an entire board of directors. Later that evening, as the story dominated every news channel in the city, Isabella sat in her father's hospital room with Marcus, watching the coverage. James had been moved to a private suite surrounded by the best medical care money could buy, but he seemed more interested in the small television mounted on the wall than his upgraded accommodations. "You did good today, Bella," James said, squeezing her hand. "You stood up for what was right, even when it was hard." "I learned from the best," Isabella replied, looking from her father to Marcus. "Both of you." A soft knock interrupted them, and Catherine Sterling appeared in the doorway. She looked older somehow, smaller, the perfect facade finally cracked beyond repair. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Isabella tensed, but James nodded. "Let her speak, Bella. Everyone deserves a chance to tell their truth." Catherine approached the bed slowly, her eyes red with tears. "James, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Are you?" James asked, not unkindly. "Or are you just sorry you got caught?" Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I need you to know. It wasn't supposed to be forever. When Robert first suggested having you committed, he said it would just be temporary, just until we could find treatment, until the dementia stabilized." "But then the money became too tempting," Isabella said coldly. "Yes," Catherine whispered. "God help me, yes. Robert showed me how much we could gain, how secure Isabella's future would be if we controlled the family assets. He made it sound like we were protecting her, protecting our family's legacy." "By stealing from my father," Isabella replied, "by letting me grieve for a man who was alive and waiting for me." Catherine turned to her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Isabella, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Every lie I told, every secret I kept, I told myself it was to protect you." "Protect me from what? From knowing my father loved me? From having a relationship with the one person who's ever loved me unconditionally?" "From seeing him deteriorate," Catherine sobbed. "From watching the man you remembered disappear piece by piece. I thought if you believed he died as the father you remembered, that would be kinder than watching him fade away." Isabella stood up, facing her mother. "That wasn't your choice to make. You stole 15 years from both of us. You let me build my entire adult life on a foundation of lies." "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Catherine looked at Marcus. "Thank you for giving her back her father, for having the courage I should have had." Marcus nodded quietly, but didn't speak. Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "I've prepared a full confession. Everything Robert and I did, every document we forged, every lie we told, it's all there. I'll testify against Robert if necessary. I won't let him destroy any more lives." She placed the envelope on James's bedside table and turned to leave, then paused. "Isabella, for what it's worth, your father would be proud of the woman you've become. You're stronger than I ever was, braver, better." After Catherine left, the three of them sat in silence for a long time, processing the complexity of love and betrayal, forgiveness and justice. "What will you do?" James finally asked Isabella. "About your mother." Isabella considered the question carefully. "I'll testify truthfully about what happened. I'll make sure she faces appropriate consequences for her choices. But I won't let hatred poison my heart the way greed poisoned hers." "And Robert?" Isabella's expression hardened. "Robert Sterling will pay for every year he stole from us. Every single day you spent alone, wondering if I would ever come to find you. He'll answer for all of it." Marcus squeezed her hand. "The truth is powerful, but so is love. Don't let the need for justice turn you into someone you're not." Isabella looked at this man who had risked everything to reunite her with her father, who had shown her that integrity mattered more than wealth, that love was stronger than lies. "You're right," she said softly. "The best revenge isn't destroying them. It's building something better, something true." 6 months later, Isabella stood in the same cathedral where her wedding had been interrupted, but this time the space was filled with employees from Ashford Industries, patients from Mercy General Hospital, and dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the new employee welfare program Marcus had designed. It wasn't a wedding this time, but a celebration, the launch of the James Ashford Foundation for Truth and Reconciliation, dedicated to helping families torn apart by greed and deception find their way back to each other. James sat in the front pew, his condition stabilized by the best medical care available, surrounded by nurses and volunteers from the hospital. He was thinner now, more frail, but his eyes were bright with pride as he watched his daughter speak. "My father once told me," Isabella said into the microphone, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral, "that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're afraid. Today, I want to honor a man who showed me that kind of courage, not my father, though he taught me well, but Marcus Kane, who risked everything to tell me a truth that changed both our lives forever." She turned to Marcus, who stood beside her in a simple black suit, looking uncomfortable with the attention but glowing with quiet pride. "Marcus showed me that the most important voices are often the ones we never think to listen to. That integrity isn't about perfection. It's about choosing what's right over what's easy, truth over comfort, love over profit. The foundation we're launching today will help other families find their way back to truth, back to each other, back to the kind of love that money can't buy and lies can't destroy." The applause was thunderous, but Isabella barely heard it. She was looking at her father, seeing his proud smile, feeling Marcus's hand in hers, surrounded by people who had chosen truth over convenience and love over fear. Later, at the reception held in the hospital's renovated community center, Isabella found Marcus standing alone on the small balcony, looking out over the city. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, joining him at the railing. "About which part? Falling in love with a billionaire? Becoming the director of a foundation I never could have imagined? Or completely upending my quiet life by deciding to tell the truth?" Isabella laughed. "Any of it, all of it." Marcus turned to face her, his expression serious. "Isabella, 6 months ago I was a janitor who nobody noticed. Today I stood in front of 300 people and talked about truth and justice and healing. A year ago, if someone had told me this would be my life, I would have thought they were insane. And now? Now I think maybe the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to be brave instead of safe." He pulled her closer. "I think maybe love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself." "Is that what this is? Love?" Marcus smiled. "Isabella Ashford, I fell in love with you the moment you chose truth over comfort, when you walked away from everything safe and familiar because it was the right thing to do, when you chose to see people, really see them, instead of just walking past them." Isabella felt tears start again, but they were happy tears this time. "I love you too, Marcus Kane. I love your courage and your kindness, and your refusal to stay quiet when speaking up is the right thing to do." They kissed there, on the balcony, with the lights of Philadelphia spread out below them and the sound of celebration drifting from inside. It wasn't the wedding kiss Isabella had planned 6 months ago, but it was better. It was real. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked when they broke apart. "Now we go inside and celebrate with our friends. Now we spend every Saturday having pancakes with my father until we can't anymore. Now we build a foundation that helps other people find their way back to truth." Isabella smiled. "Now we prove that sometimes the most important love stories begin with the most unexpected people." A billionaire and a janitor? A woman who thought she knew everything and a man who taught her to see clearly. A daughter who thought her father was dead and a son who made sure she found him again. Two people who learned that integrity matters more than inheritance and that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. From inside, they could hear James's laughter mixing with the voices of nurses and volunteers, employees and patients, people from all walks of life brought together by the simple belief that everyone deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. "Come on," Isabella said, taking Marcus's hand. "Let's go back inside. We have a foundation to run, a father to spoil, and a lifetime of choosing truth over comfort ahead of us. Together? Together." As they walked back into the celebration, neither of them looked back at the cathedral where Isabella's old life had ended and her real life had begun. They had learned that sometimes the most important moments come disguised as disasters, that sometimes the most valuable gifts come from the most unexpected sources, and that sometimes a single act of courage can change everything. The janitor had stopped the wedding, but in doing so, he had started something much more beautiful. A love story built on truth, a family reunited by courage, and a foundation that would help countless others find their way home. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.